Welcome to A Woman's Brew, where women talk about beer. Today, we explore how SIBA are attempting to highlight the indie in the UK independent beer scene. I'm Joanne, and this is Tori.
Hello.
And we're two beer-loving women on a mission to get more people drinking and talking about great beer. Come join us. Well, there has been some interesting things happening in the UK beer scene.
Yes,
so we thought we'd talk about it. We thought we'd do like a proper news thing for a change.
This is actually off the press, not that long ago. I mean, it's not like fresh off the press, but it's like, leftovers off the press.
So, it's the best you're going to get, listeners.
Yeah, from us in terms of a timely manner, it's probably the best turnaround time for news you're going to get, because normally by the time we get onto it, we're like, it normally goes in our backlog and then gets pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to the point that we're like, there's no point in doing this anymore. And even when we think that we're the first people, we're like, we've got this idea, and then before we can execute, everyone else does. So yeah. We're like, there's no point. This one, though, I do feel like it's a genuinely interesting topic that no matter how many people have put it out by the time this comes out, I think there's not too many people. I think that I don't think there's a number that's too many people to talk about it. But
no, I don't think so.
This is hot off the presses-ish from October 22nd. So, yeah. Do you want to introduce what it is we're talking about?
Yeah, so we're talking about SIBA, the Society for Independent Brewers and Associates. They are a UK-based trade organisation that represents and supports independent breweries. They were formed in 1980. Their key activities include advocating and lobbying with the UK government, the promotion of independent breweries, providing training and resources for its members, hosting regional and national beer competitions, and organising the annual trade show BeerX. That's who they are. They have recently launched a campaign that should help consumers identify UK breweries that are, air quotes, truly independent breweries. I mean, we've talked about this before, about how you can walk into a pub and it says, air quotes, craft beer. And then there's some breweries in there that are probably not independent. So there's a lot of people that are, not as well-versed in the craft beer industry of the UK or within the craft beer community of the UK that will walk into a pub and go, yeah, I'll have this beer over here. I'm refraining from naming names at the moment. keep it high level at the moment. Yeah, but you pick a beer and people see that it's air quotes craft beer. It's called independent beer. They think it's independent beer. They think it's it's brewed by a smaller brewery. But it ends up being one that's been bought out by a massive macro brewery, or it's owned by somebody else now. I mean, there's that argument, how much does that matter? And I think that comes down to a little bit of personal preference, a little bit of I don't want to tar anybody with brushes, but I think there's a little bit of a, values and ethics and culture all makes a play in this. Like, what are the reasons that we drink craft beer other than it just being really tasty?
Yeah,
I
think
of that is
your kind
when you've got a brewery that's saying it's craft but is actually owned by a multi-global company.
You're kind in saying, like, oh, I won't name names, because I actually, I think about it.
Name names slightly further down the line.
Oh, right, okay. Well, I was going to say,
I'm going to, but I feel like in this high level of it, I haven't.
I feel like it's relevant though. Like, we've talked about it before. You walk into a pub and you see craft, and it's like Camden Hellers. It's Beavertown, Neck Oil. It's and I don't think that there's, again, like, I don't think that it's being unkind saying like a label of independent versus not independent, because I actually think, again, how much does it matter? It just depends on you as a consumer in your beer journey. Like, I actually don't think it is exclusively paired with what your values are. I think that can play into it, but I don't think that that is something that they are mutually exclusive to each other. Like, you don't have the values that an indie brewer might have if you're drinking certain things. Like, it's a very sensitive topic, I think, but there's definitely like it's a difference. From my viewpoint, it is a difference in who that money is going to and who you are supporting.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
A large brewery can a bigger company that owns several smaller breweries can kind of, as long as they've got one really successful brand, like if you're AB and Bev, and if you've got Bud Light or Budweiser, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it, so I'm like trying to put it in the terms of somebody that's maybe listening that doesn't know. If you own Budweiser and you've got that, and then you've got lots of small little breweries around that, your Budweiser can pretty much float those smaller breweries for you. If you are a local brewery that is owned by a family and that is your source of income to keep that brewery going, you don't necessarily have as much to keep that afloat. So hopefully that makes sense in the regards of like when you're thinking about the differences, what some of the differences are, more so than like, you know, Joe, what you're saying, not trying to put that, oh, it could be a values thing, it could be this, it could be that, like to keep it even higher level than that. Like it is who that money is going to and who that is impacting.
Yeah,
does that sound fair to say?
Yeah, it's the whole small business thing, isn't it? So like, you know, if you're supporting small business, you're, you know, putting food on that business owner's table, you're putting, you know, you're paying for the kids' dance lessons, you're paying, you know, they're paying for the kids' shoes. It's like when they really want to pull your heartstrings, that's the, you know, it getting down into the nitty gritty. You're paying for that person, that business owner, to live. When you're buying something from a bigger corporation, you know, that's chump change.
So yeah, hopefully that does a good job of sort of like high level overviewing. I think a lot of things that get cited as well is like people say like Madry, for example, like that people were surprised to find out that Madry wasn't actually was it brewed in Spain, like that it was not actually a Spanish beer, and they were Spanish.
Like that was brilliant.
And they were like, oh, that's not a small craft like Spanish outfit. No,
my friend,
it is not. It is not. But I understand how people that aren't necessarily people that like drinking beer as their drink when they go out, but they're not necessarily nerdy about beer. To them, maybe it doesn't really matter. It's just a social thing. It's going to the pub. It's, you know, whatever's on. If it's telling you that it's a craft beer, you might take it on face value. You might just go, oh, yeah, that's craft, cool. I'll have that. That's how you identify it. And you might think there's a bit more flavor to that. And yeah, I can see how you might not, if it's something that's newer into the market as well, you might not associate that with like a big brewery, like a big corporation, because you're like, oh, this is new. I've not seen this before. And it's listed under craft. I didn't realize. So I totally get that. But yeah, with this campaign being launched, it's launched not just with SIBA, but they were supported by other organizations as well. So Camera. What I thought was cool was one of them that was listed as the British Institute of Innkeepers, the BII. Like, I was like, I've never heard of that. That is cool. The Independent Family Brewers of Britain, the IFBB. And yeah, they've had other outlets like Pelican Magazine, and that's all listed on there. We'll share the link to the indie beer. But what most people, especially people that are probably listening to it, so at the start, I've kind of tried to phrase it in a way that's people that maybe don't know as much about beer that might have found us and are listening to us. But I think a lot of the people that do listen to us are in similar circles to us in terms of the social media that they consume around beer. And you'll notice by the branding that's on it, it's that IB on a everyone like locally, to me anyways, a lot of local breweries were sharing that, you know, hand holding the glass that says indie beer and IB in black and white on it. I'm guessing you've probably been inundated with some of the same over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I've definitely seen it. And it's like, you know, obviously I think we're going to talk about it in a minute, but that logo can be used by people that are deemed to be independent brewers on their packaging so that people can be assured that it is independent beer. The US have been doing this for some time. I'm looking around my room to see if
I've got it.
Have you got one? It's got a hand, like
it's something that I've actually planned on us to talk about.
Yes.
So if you're watching the video, I've got an
The
example
Brewers
of it.
Association has had a logo.
Independent. It's basically a bottle that says Independent Craft on it.
Yeah.
It's an
So
upside down bottle that says Independent Craft.
They've had that for a while for people to put on their beer. So it's something that now we have very similar over here in the UK. So you should be able to identify independent brewers through this mark. Of course, this then brings up the age-old question: what is craft beer? What is an independent brewery? Which is always a fun discussion. So we thought we'd have that today.
All those answers and more we can give to you. But first, before we even get into all that,
I don't know if we can.
well,
we can give you
that. We can't give you the more
and opinions on it.
We can't give you all those
answers. Yeah.
What we can tell you about is what a US body defines as things and what a UK body has come up with.
Do that what you will.
Yeah, and you can make up your own mind. But before we even get into that, what are you drinking?
I am drinking Little Fanfare from Duration.
Oh.
I mean, I don't think you can get more independent than Duration, can you?
No, I don't think you can. Well.
So I thought that was a fair. I didn't look on the website to see if they. I would assume they are.
Oh, we'll get into that in a minute.
Well, check because to me they're independent.
Can you get more?
They better be.
Can you get more independent than that? I have validated that mine is independent.
Oh, you have.
I have Black Kite from Holy Goat, which is a tropical sour with lychee and jasmine. So you can really taste the lychee in it. Like, it's very lychee heavy. Not in a bad way. It tastes like a cocktail.
Oh, nice. So this is a grisette. It is one of my favourite Duration beers ever. Little Fanfare. I generally try and grab one. This and the Marzen that comes out every year. I try and grab them whenever I can. It's very rare that I buy a beer multiple times, but this is one of them.
I feel like they're all sticking with that theme on the Holy Goat front. Like, I will buy Blood Witch, Goat Witch, all those ones like numerous
You're an instant
times.
Buy.
They're so good. Oh, I know. They just put out the collab they did. Was it for the Women in Beer Festival collab? And it's made with dates. It's a Flanders Red, I think, made with dates. And I was like, that take my money.
Available when I was up at the Women in Beer Festival.
I nearly bought it the other night. And I was like, no, not yet, not right now. But yeah, I do want to buy it, so it sounds good. But I am a sucker. But yeah, this tastes like almost like a porn star martini, and it's very like, because it has that sparkling element to it. That tartness that you get, and then like the shot of prosecco type of taste to it as well. It's very drying at the end. I love it. It's really, really good. Just what I needed after today. But yeah, so that was kind of the summary of the campaign and who SIBA are and what this whole thing is about. When you actually read through the criteria, so obviously we can provide you with all these links. We can provide you with a link to the announcement that came out on the 22nd of October on SIBA's website. We can provide you with the link to indiebeer.uk, which is all about the indie beer movement that they are starting there. And yeah, the criteria for it, that's listed. So there's 3 pieces of criteria. So the first one is, I thought we could talk about it. I'll read them all out and then we can kind of talk about our thoughts on that. So the first one is be a manufacturer of beer and have their own brewing equipment, or be an independent beer brand brewed and packaged at a qualifying brewery. Beer produced for commercial sale up to a maximum permitted production volume of 1% of the British beer market as defined by industry statistics in respect to the previous calendar year. That's number 1. Number 2, be a UK-based sole trader partnership, limited liability partnership, or limited company that is permanently based in the UK and carries out a minimum of 75% of its total beer production in the UK. For the purposes of the UK, shall include the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man. And the third thing is not be under the control or connected with any other entity operating within the UK brewing industry as defined by the Corporation Tax Act 2010, except where, as a result of such control or connection, the combined entity does not contravene A above. So that's the 3 things that are listed to be able to sort of qualify for this. I've got thoughts. I've noted down my thoughts, but What are your thoughts on those?
I think that's pretty technical. Like, if you're not if you're a consumer reading that, you're not going to be able to work that out yourself.
No, my exact words were legalese, was what my notes
Yeah.
on my notes for the last 2 points. I put legalese.
Yeah. And I feel like there might be some brewers that wouldn't be able to work out what they're talking about there. So I don't think they've necessarily written that in a very accessible way. I
Wouldn't
also
disagree.
feel like the first one where it was talking about the equipment is very interesting, because I'm going to go and I'm looking at the exact wording now. So I think have their own brewing equipment or be an independent beer brand brewed and packaged at a qualifying brewery. I think that's interesting. So if you're like, because in our current climate, some breweries have had to go to contract brewing, they've had to go to cuckoo brewing. If that place that is then brewing and packaging your beer isn't a qualifying brewery, like what is the definition of a qualifying brewery? And that makes you not independent because you found a way to continue your business or start your business in a sustainable way for you, and that means that you're not independent. I don't know if I agree with that.
That was more or less my thoughts on it as well. Like I think in principle I understand what they're trying to do here, but my argument was I've got concerns for people that we're friends with, like who technically don't meet this criteria based on what it says, but that, in my opinion, doesn't make them any less craft, doesn't make them any less independent. I think there could be very valid reasons. It comes back to that accessibility and like, there could be very valid reasons why they can't brew at a brewery that's considered qualifying. Like maybe the brewery that they're brewing at is the one that is most cost effective for them, is the most, sustainable, because they're not having to go super far away to get the beer to bring it to where they're selling it from. Like maybe it's a fact that the brewery that they are able to brew at doesn't really care to get the certificate. Like for them, it doesn't really matter. Like that kind of stuff feels like it. Again, I'm trying to. I think in this episode we really want to play devil's advocate more than anything else, and I think it's like overall, I think it's fair to say, like at the start of things, from my perspective, I think this is like I want to qualify to say I think this is a really good initiative that's happening, but I want to call out that is something that is concerning for me. It feels too black and white in this space for my liking, and I think it's missing some of the key demographics of people that need to be on the forefront of this movement, because those are the ones that are probably the highest at risk for being unable to get to a point where they can meet this very black and white criteria. I'm keen to understand how this criteria was developed, to be honest. Like, who was it, like, specifically that was like, actually, what went into deciding that specific wording, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And I just like the definition. There's always been this horrible grey area nonsense around, what is craft beer? We keep saying craft beer. Now, what we're really talking about here is independent beer, which people could argue is something different. But I just think whenever we start trying to define it, it's like smoke, right? Like trying to define it and it just kind of like, well, this, you say this thing and it disappears, and you say that thing and it disappears. Like, it's very difficult. If you haven't, and we've recommended this before, if you haven't read it, go read Craft Beer and Argument by Pete Brown. Like, very good essay, like long essay because it's a book, on craft beer and trying to define it.
Very fair, very balanced.
Very fair, very balanced. Lots of viewpoints looked at. It's and at the end, I don't think it really does come to a definitive conclusion.
But I don't think he was trying to. I think it was very much playing around with the idea of what is that concept. Therefore,
can we come to a conclusion? Do you know what I mean? Again, like you're saying, this is very black and white. I think when you make it too black and white, you don't come to a conclusion. Yeah.
I would argue, for me, the second 2 points are probably more when we're talking about independent breweries as opposed to craft breweries, which is what is trying to be defined here. I think it feels more like the second 2 points are actually the things that they're the harder for me. They're the harder ones to understand because they read very legalese for me. They were the harder ones to understand, but arguably for me, those are the ones that kind of define independent to me more than who owns the kit and what's happening there. I think when it comes to the kit and the packaging and stuff, like for me, it's how involved is the brewery? Like, do they just give someone else a recipe or have someone else make the recipe for them? Or did they come up with the recipe? Obviously, there might be some assistance needed from the owning kit, the brewery that owns the kit, to say this is how it needs to scale on this particular kit, or this is what I think we should do on this particular kit. But, you know, it would be if somebody is kind of saying this is my recipe and this is what it, and they're tasting it and making sure they're happy with it, even if they're not physically the one brewing it. Like, I think what's more important is that who owns that and is making the decisions for that brewery. Is it a big business, or is it like a couple that have started a brewery?
Yeah.
For example, I'm just plucking something out of the air, and I think,
and I get that they're trying to like kind of weed out. I just had a little laugh to myself if you're watching the video, because it reminded me of a little scenario that I ended up in once. Like it's them weeding out where you've got air quotes breweries, and like you're in, like, you know, you're in a. We'll put this into context. I was at a wedding, and the venue had its own lager. There's going to be a lot of air quotes, guys.
yeah,
It had its own air quotes lager, and I was like, "Oh, that's, you know, where'd you get that brewed?" Because obviously there was no brewery on this wedding site, and they were like, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's it. It's not actually ours. It's from Shepherd Neame," and I was like, "Right." And so Shepherd Neame will brew their lager, and they allow people to like white label it, and so that they can then And I understand that some of this is trying to get rid of that because it was just Spitfire. and I drank it and I was like, "This is just Spitfire, right?" And he looked at me and he was like, "Do you work for Shepherd Neame?" And I was like, "No, dude. Like, just no beer." But like they just they just put it out and let them relabel it. You're not an independent brewery if you're taking somebody else's beer and just sticking your label on it.
I think it's how involved. That. It's hard to put it, I think, into. I think the most difficult challenge with it is what they were probably trying to do is put the parameters around it to stop that, and it's very hard to make clear definition or clear defined outlines of what something is and isn't when there is so much that is hard to put in black and white terminology. Like something like that. Like, how do you define the amount of input a brewer has to have, or a brewery owner has to have into, you know, is it just they have to have come up with a recipe? Like, does that work for the definition? Do they have to brew it themselves? Do they have, you know, how much input does that person have to have? But I think on those other 2 points, when it talks about the tradership, like I said, it is quite difficult for me to understand it. But like for me, it was interesting that they said that partnership was listed as an option. Like, to say something's independent, but they're saying like, oh, it's a UK-based sole trader, that could be a partnership or a limited liability partnership or a limited company. Like, that feels like that is so. Again, I don't know legal stuff. So like, to me, when I read that as a layman, I was like, I have no idea what this is. I'm like, is that like, what does that actually mean? Like, could somebody have a partnership and pretty much do fuck all, but then be like, oh no, but it's still independent, even though I've just invested in something and I don't really do anything with it?
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that they particularly picked out that it was like, you know, permanently, we're talking about UK independent beer here. So, you know, permanently based in the UK and carries out a minimum of 75% of its total beer production in the UK.
I feel like it should be 100%.
Right, I can't think of many what I would consider independent or craft breweries that are brewing significant chunks overseas.
Yeah, it feels like for me, if this is going to be a seal of approval for UK breweries to signify independent status, that number 75 again. Like, I'd be curious to see the examples where it is 75 and 25% is somewhere, or there's any
else.
percentage that's being brewed on a regular basis. Like, I don't know if this is maybe on the odd occasion they've done a collab with someone and that's brewed overseas, or I don't know if that's counted in that total. But then again, that feels like a weird exception. It should be like the brewery and the beers that they put out are like collaboration should, in my opinion, not be considered in that, because I think
it's technically a one-off. It's a way of getting into a new market. It's, you know, it's part of the community. Like, we shouldn't be restricting that sort of thing.
Shouldn't be what factors in if that's what that number is. But like, I don't really know and understand. So it'd be really, I think from my perspective, it'd be really interesting to like get to talk to somebody from SIBA about it. So on the website, on this indiebeer.uk, it said something about like, did you want to there was something that had come up that said, support indie beer. If you're a fan of beer looking to support the campaign, or a venue or brewery interested in getting involved, you can use the below form and we'll get in touch. And I filled it out just now before we recorded, and you need your name, your email, your postcode, and a message. So the message I put is like, you know, keen to see how I can support as a customer, but also keen to understand how we can support those that maybe don't qualify for this, just as well as the people that do get this seal of approval, because I'm keen to see like what they might come back with in that regard, because I'm wondering if anybody's ever raised that to them as a concern, that what we've just talked about, if anybody's kind of said, yeah, that is a concern, or if they had a specific reason why maybe it was raised and they were like, yeah, but, and maybe there are exceptions that can be made to that. I just found that really quite interesting, to be honest. I do also have, just to give a little bit of parity, I do have sort of the craft beer, craft brewer, as described by the Brewers Association, if you want me to run through
I'd be interested to see how that compares.
So what makes, in terms of the Brewers Association definition in the US, which what we talked about, that seal of independent craft on there, to get that seal, there's 3 criteria as well, which is interesting. I don't know if that was kind of like the path they were going on 3.
If they've done that to parallel it.
So small production. So again, this is what's interesting, is they focused on the production level. So small production, annual production of 6 million barrels or less, approximately 3% of US annual sales. So I kind of took that a step further so that it could make sense to people listening in the UK. So I'm shit at math, so I had ChatGPT do the math for me, because that's what my AI buddy does. But hopefully this helps, and I'm sorry it's about to be a lot of numbers. But one US barrel is 31 US gallons, according to Google. Please don't tell me if I'm wrong. That is what I've Googled. So 6 million, which is the number they're saying is the max amount you can have, times 31 gallons equals 186 million gallons. That's a lot of gallons. If we want to know how much 1 US gallon is, 8 US pints. So 186 million times 8 is 1.488 billion. That was US pints. The 8 US pints. 1.488 billion US pints is how much all of that equals. When we do the conversion of 1 US pint, that equals 0.8327 UK pints. So all of the above, that 6 million barrels, actually equates to 1,239,537,600 UK pints. So 1.24 billion, just for ease.
That's a lot of beer.
And if I wanted to put it into even more, because I think most people know what a key keg is. So I've tried to make it even more accessible than pints, because that seems like a lot of pints. And someone's going, oh, but when you actually look at how many pints it is, what does that equate to? So assuming we use the biggest size key keg, just to give a visual, which is 30 litres. There's a lot of math workings that I'm not going to give you, but this would mean that you would need 23,472,078 kegs.
That's a lot.
Small production is one of the...
Small production.
I just would like to highlight small production is one of the... For the US, I hazard that is small, I'm guessing. But that is... Because that is also the annual production. So that's like how much over the course of a year. And obviously, if you have a big facility in the US and you're pumping out to multiple states, maybe that is considered small, if that's your biggest value. But I thought that was incredibly interesting. So that's the first criteria. The second criteria is independent ownership. So less than 25% of the brewery is owned or controlled by a beverage alcohol industry member that is not itself a craft brewer. I was slightly confused on what that meant, but I'm guessing the term of the brewer. So they kind of explain, because then they say the next step is that the brewer aspect of it is you hold a brewer's notice issued by the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau or its successor, or control the intellectual property for one or more brands of beer, have that brand or brands brewed for it in the United States, and have its primary business purpose the resale of the brand or brands it controls. So that to me was interesting, that they're like, it's brand or brands, so you can have multiple brands producing up to 23 million plus kegs and be owned, have less than 25% of the brewery owned by somebody outside. And that is sort of what that is. They had other things like the methods focused on. So there were things that they were saying, like, the focus is on, I asked ChatGPT, like, can you summarize this for me to fact check? I had to go back and properly change a lot of stuff because it just was wrong. But it listed one of the factors. The focus is traditional innovative brewing, which often includes using malt as a key ingredient. It's like, yeah, obviously. But when I actually looked at the website, yes, they do list similar types of things as like concepts related to craft beer and brewing, but the language used around it is like tends to be generally like that's more abstract. The creativity aspect and the methods and all that is more abstract. The three key things are small production, independent ownership, and being a brewer holding that license. What are your thoughts around that?
I mean, we have to remember that America is significantly larger than the UK. I think we similar thoughts around all of it. Like as a consumer, as a non-beer nerd, you look at any of that and you're like, I just want a pint of beer. Like, leave me alone, right? Like, that does make it significantly more difficult for them to understand. It's significantly more difficult for us to understand what is being required of a brewery. And I feel like I remember reading that, again, some of this is a bit contentious, and there's breweries over in the US that are like, well, what about XYZ in this? Like, none of it is, I don't think any of it is ever black and white. And I think whenever we try and make it black and white, it just brings up difficulties.
I don't disagree. I think what I like about this is I like that there's a number associated in a way. But I think I would argue it's too hard to put a number on it because there'll always be an exception to the rule. Because ultimately, you want these people to be successful. You want them to continue to scale up and be able to produce better, more. So I don't even think you could kind of go, oh, a fair number for what we think is what the output of a normal kit that could be used is this. But what happens if they expand and grow and change? And then you're like, okay, now we have to amp that number up. It needs to be something that has scalability and longevity. So I think that that's really difficult. Whereas at least in the US, because it's such a large number, maybe it's a little bit easier to have that proper number. But I like that it has a little bit more specifics around it in that regard. However, I don't see how that's, for us in the UK, potentially scalable. What I liked, though, is that in the independent, not in the independent ownership, in the brewer aspect of holding the license, it does specifically say have that basically the brand or the brands that it brews for it are brewed in the United States. And so, like, to me, I like that clear definition, because I think that 75% is where I question, like,
so weird.
that feels a weird number, because we want to say it's UK independent. So I don't understand where, and we're even saying like Channel Islands count, and the, you know, Isle of Wight counts, like
Isle
of Man, yeah, like all these things count as part of the UK. Like, we're appreciating these entities that are around the UK and considered UK entities. So like the 75% thing for me is a little bit weird. What I like about the US is it's very clearly like it is brewed in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, is there a particular approach you think that you prefer one over the other?
No, I don't think there is. I think I think when we try and define it, it's too difficult. I think a little bit of it needs to be on the drinker. If you want to know where your where the beer is coming from, who the brewery is, I think you need to do a little bit of your own research. Like if you're interested in supporting local business, supporting small business, I think you need to do a little bit of your own research. If you're the type of person that's just wandering into the pub and buying a pint, then none of this matters.
Do you think that in terms of this campaign that it has longevity? Do you think there's like, from the way I kind of see it, so to share, like, I think there's so much potential for this to have longevity and to be super helpful, but I don't see, for me, I feel like this has to be a V1 and it can't be its final form.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's useful, but I just think as soon as we try and define anything, there's going to be arguments for this, that, and the other. That's always going to be. And as soon as we try and define it and put parameters around it, yeah, but what about this? Oh, and what about that person? And what about this? And there's always going to be an argument about it.
I think that there should be like kind of, I like where they're going with it. I like the general concept, and that's why I think, like, as a V1 it's great, but I think that there is a lot of people that actually probably need, as I said at the start, I think there's a lot of people that probably need this type of label even more so to push the point home, the fact that they are small, independent, you know, what have you, that are going to be left out of this. And I think that actually what we should be doing is, it should be like, here is the outline of what we consider somebody that deserves that merit badge of saying, here you have the indie beer badge. But I think there should be like kind of an appeals process where there's more that's taken into consideration. So if you're saying, like, if that was the case, I think the second 2 points, I still think for me need to be like put more in basic terms, plain terms that anybody can understand. What if you have something like, for me, again, as you were saying, like, as an individual person, I can barely understand that, let alone like, can a brewer, like a brewer hopefully would maybe have a slightly better understanding in a way because of being in the industry and stuff. But like, what if you're a person that has, like, English isn't your first language, and now not only is English not your first language, but now it's like in a way that's really difficult to understand. So I feel like there's probably a better way that they could be written while having that underlying legalese, but a statement that makes it easier to understand for those 2 points. But if that were the case, that there was like an appeals process that could be taken into consideration, I feel like then I'd be happier with the first point. If I knew that somebody that maybe is like, oh, there's circumstances as to why I can't meet this, but the spirit of it is there, that could be something that happens. I think I'd be a lot more, I'd be less concerned with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Is there anything in any of the things you've read where, like, you know, they said they're, you know, going to be willing to work with breweries that don't fall into these that fall outside of this for whatever reason, like if they want to make sure that they are being independent, is there a way that they, you know, can work with SIBA to become independent?
I think that there was nothing I read that said that, but like I don't think I would be shocked if they weren't willing to entertain a conversation.
Yeah.
If somebody cared and was passionate enough to do it. I can't imagine they wouldn't entertain that conversation. I have no idea. I'm just blind guessing, but I think it would be bizarre if they didn't entertain that conversation. But there was nothing overtly saying like that I saw. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I hadn't seen anything that said like, if you don't have this, then let us know. But what it did say, so on the website, you can do brewery checker, and there was on the brewery checker there was something that was there that said if you, I can't find it now because I can't find which screen it was, but there was something that basically said like, if you think somebody's missing from this list or isn't showing correctly, please contact us and let us know, sort of thing. So that is something. Yeah, so that's something that came up, that you could contact them if you felt like, spotted an error or omission, email office@siba.co.uk and we'll look into it. So like, I can't imagine that you couldn't email that and say like, look, I don't technically qualify for this. What, you know, I want to have a conversation about it. But yeah, I think it would be an interesting conversation to have. I don't know how many people, maybe it's not as many people impacted as we think would be. Maybe there's a little bit more flexibility, but I'm taking it black and white as it's listed. And I think that's the only concern. And no, I didn't see anything that was kind of encouraging. Because like Brave Noise, it was a little bit like with that, obviously it's very different, but with that, it was pretty much like, here's our criteria. If you don't meet that criteria, or you can't meet some of that criteria in the sense of like, being able to do the charity things, being able to do other things, like contact us, have a conversation with us. Like the key thing is that you're doing X. We care about you doing the code of conduct. So as long as that is what you're doing and you're doing all those good things, the right things, like, yeah, we can make exceptions. Talk to us. We'll have a conversation. I didn't come across anything here that said like, let's have a conversation. And I'm not saying that's not the case. It's just,
and we haven't clearly found it. Yeah, we haven't clearly found it when we've gone through the things.
No, and to be fair, probably the reason for that is because what I'm reading is like the press release on it and the website on it. It's not really like the forums where it might be asking for that type of feedback conversation, if that makes sense. Like I don't want anyone to listen to us and think that we're kind of saying that like, oh, SIBA don't want to have a conversation, because that's not at all what we're saying. But yeah, it's quite interesting because I would be open to seeing what that conversation would look like. I said, just because we know people that, in theory, would they tick off that first thing? Like some of them potentially wouldn't tick that off yet, or they're in the process of being able to tick that off, but they're not quite there yet with the kit, for example. But they are the people that absolutely need this badge, in my opinion. I think the second point, though, was like, for me, that I wanted to talk to you about is, do we actually think that this is solving the problem at hand? As in, the people that don't really know this difference, is it going to matter to them? Because there was a quote in the article that I read that said, SIBA say the issue isn't demand for independent beer. The issue is getting access to market and ensuring genuine independent beer is being sold to beer drinkers. My question is whether or not we think that those that are getting fooled, quote unquote, for lack of a better way to kind of describe it, are people that genuinely would care either way. Do we think it's going to change the market?
Right, I think that is the question. Like, who are these people that they spoke to? Because in that article, like they were like, oh, we went in and we spoke to these people, and you know, we were like, oh, did you buy neck oil? Yeah, I'm paraphrasing right here, but it's like, you know, did you buy neck oil? Yeah. Do you know that neck oil? Like, do you think neck oil is craft beer, independent beer? Yeah. Oh, it's not. You know, oh, I didn't know that, and the amount of people that didn't know that they weren't. But the argument is, do those people actually care? like, are they going to go to this tool and actually look up, you know, neck oil and be like, oh, that's not independent, so I'm going to buy something else? Or did they just go into the pub and go, I'm going to have that beer? Like, I wonder if some of the statistics that are used to justify doing this are a little bit skewed because it's not the right audience.
I think my personal feeling on it is that I'm not 100% sure that the lack of knowledge is what's guiding them to choose what they're choosing. Like, I think some of it is like, that's just the taste that they prefer. And like, they probably don't have a passion one way or another of who it is that they're buying from, what they're drinking. They're just like, oh, like, I would argue potentially that the bigger issue that we have at hand isn't somebody not understanding if something's independently owned or not. It's that the venues that people are going into aren't. That's, I think, probably the bigger problem. The venues aren't the ones that are understanding of independent breweries or not. And I'm not saying whether or not
on.
Yeah, because what I don't think would happen is somebody, you go, like you said, paraphrase, Beavertown, that's did you know that's not independent? No, I didn't. Okay, well, are they not going to go if you turned around and said, yeah, none of these beers that they have on are independent, but that's your local, that's the local place that you go to drink,
go somewhere else?
I'm not convinced that people would go, you know what, I'm going to go. I think
unless they're beer people, unless they're beer nerds, they're craft beer people, and then they're already going to the more interesting venues anyway.
I think it's more about getting the craft into more of a mainstream space, to be honest. I think that is something that the US does do quite well in comparison to us. I think you have like bigger restaurants and venue, like just overall venues that have independent beer served at them, more so in the US than here. If you're lucky, you might get a venue that is like, we have a local brewery here and we've done a really good job of building up these friendships and relationships and we have a local beer on in addition to other stuff. But I don't think that's commonplace. And I'm not trying to talk about any of this in absolutes because I don't know. I overall think that this is a really good movement to have to mark some of this stuff. I'm just not sure it's solving the problem that quote suggests it's potentially solving. I think, not to say that's not what they think they're solving.
Yeah.
I just would question, to play devil's advocate, like, are people bothered? Like, the ones that don't already know, are they going to be bothered and go, I had no idea. Oops, I'll change that.
And instead, should this, indie beer finder be being put in front of pub owners instead, so that they know what's independent? And then the problem is, some of these pub owners don't have the opportunity to put on that much independent beer because they're tied or whatever. So there are other factors around this that again makes it redundant.
I think what I think will be really, really interesting is to see, because they've referenced a report. I think what would be really interesting would be to see this report that they've done, to kind of do whatever reporting that they can do pre all of this rolling out, and then to see in 6 months' time or a year's time, have we seen any changes based on places that have used beers that have this label on the pump clip, for example? I'm not saying that we wouldn't see changes. I genuinely am curious to see what that would look like, and do we see this moving the needle in a positive direction because of this movement? I'd like to hope that the answer would be yes. But again, I'm not sold that the people that don't know are the ones that are going to be, now that this is here. I think for those of us I think it helps for people that are kind of caught in the in-between. It helped. I want to be really clear. Like, I think it really helps for people caught in the in-between who are just getting into beer. They're starting their journey, and they're maybe not, they're still one foot in being casual, one foot in the like, oh, I'm really interested in learning more about the nerdier side of beer. And I think it's also really helpful to people that have a friend or family member that's super into beer and they're trying to like find something that's actually really good for people they know. I think it's really good for people that maybe want to start that journey and they don't really know where to start, because on the website, super helpfully, there is you can click on so there's several tabs at the top, and one is indie breweries. And you can either put in the name of a brewery and search for it, and it will kind of bring up a map, or you can put in your postcode. I put in my postcode. There was 5 within a 15-minute drive from me, which was funny. Technically on the map, there was 4. What I thought was funny was they put a pin for Siren on Elusive, but there's no pin for Elusive, but both are on this list of independent brewers. So I think that's probably a slight error, or it was meant to be a pin for both of them, but it just says Siren on the actual pin. I had to zoom in to be like, that is over on Elusive, and it says Siren. Interesting.
Submit that as
I might do, actually, because there's already people that like, there are so many. I had this conversation with somebody at the weekend, actually. There's so many people, hilariously, that will like go to Siren, and not so much now, but probably before they opened up the second room. But we were having this conversation, weren't we?
Yeah.
It was you that I was having the conversation with.
Yeah.
So many people that don't know still, that it's like, oh yeah, Elusive's literally right there. They go to Siren and they're like, oh wow, bonus brewery. It's like, it's hilarious. So yeah, I might submit that. But super, super helpful if you're like going someplace. So normally you ask on forums, Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, or you Google search, whatever. But you can put in the postcode of where you're going to be and be like, actually, what independent breweries are around me? So that could be really good for UK staycation trips when you're going to be in a particular area and you want to know what's around you. Like, that's super, super useful in that regard, I think. So that will help people, I think, want to get into it more, but they don't know what's around them. Yeah. I think the biggest hurdle is going to be to get that in front of those people, because if they don't know what's craft and what's not craft, air quotes craft, but if they don't know what's independent is this target audience and not, are they going to know who SIBA is? Are they going to know what the indie beer movement is? If they're not going to the places, I would like to know how the plan is to get that out there, because everywhere, obviously, I've seen it advertised. Are the breweries putting it out there? Are the forums where the beer nerds are already there?
I also went to the wrong website.
Did you? Yes, because there's a beer shop that's also called...
a beer shop that's called indiebeer.co.uk. And I was like, oh, that's not the right website. So it's a little bit close to that. So you can end up not being able to find it.
What I thought was quite interesting on this checker, I'm going to get a little bit controversial, but only because I think it was interesting to mention, is I was kind of like checking over some breweries, and I went to the brewery checker, because you can do the one where you put the postcode and it will show you the map, or you can just do the one to say, is this a independent brewery, and you just search for it and it will come up with, is it independent, yes or no, are they SIBA members, yes or no, all that good stuff. I put in Brewdog. All of the outposts so Outpost Waterloo, Outpost Tower Hill, Outpost Manchester, all listed, as is Brewdog. They're all listed as not an independent brewery, which I found was very interesting.
Yeah, because I feel like we still think of Brewdog as independent, right?
A lot of people will still say, oh, they are independent though, but according to this, they are not to these rules. They are not. I don't know if that has to do with maybe production. Like, could this fall under the production of beer? Could it fall under the who's got vested interest in it? Like,
because they make a lot of their beer in different countries, don't they? So whether that percentage is part of the issue there.
Yep, and that's why potentially that's where that's kicking in, but it also could be people that are like stakeholders, because obviously the stipulations were, let me just go back to it, but the stipulations were around the ownership that, so that's the US one that I'm thinking of, but I'm wondering if this does have anything to do with like who has a stake in it, and the entities that are involved as well. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I did I put a few breweries in there and wasn't surprised when they came up as independent.
Duration is independent. You're safe.
Oh, good. I think so too. I was interested to see that Echo did not come up at all.
Yep, I did the same.
I was wondering where they got their list from. Obviously their members are going to be on there, but they have breweries on there that are not members. So where Where did they get the list from?
That was a question I had as well, because, you know, part of when I was at the start being like, oh, I'm concerned about these people that are being left out that actually are the ones that probably need to get this visibility. You know, Echo is one of my mind. We were literally just at the tap room at the weekend. Awesome
it's
spot.
Lovely. Go over to Peckham and try it. It's great.
It's such a cool area as well. Like, the area's cool. It really wasn't that difficult to get to. The space is great.
I love that we both went in and we were like, we're having Echo Black first, obviously.
Yeah,
like, who are you talking to?
It was the like, oh, but why would you start on that? Like, it was known.
Why wouldn't I start on that?
I don't even think I definitely didn't have to say what I was having. I think it was very clear what I was having. But like, it's people like them that I think that's who I worry for about the branding, because they are the ones that need it. And like you said, I went and that was one of the first ones that I searched for, and it was like, nope, not listed. And I was like, oh, not even found. So not even just listed. Because so they will come up and say not a member, not independent, not that, and they didn't even come up as somebody to search for. So I don't know if the onus is on them to say, oh, hey, I would like this branding, and submit themselves. Or if other people can submit on their behalf. That's probably something I didn't really get a chance to look into that piece too much, because we wanted to get this out the door really quick. So I didn't have too much time to do that kind of deep dive prep. But that is something that I do want to look into after this episode. Like, could I submit on their behalf to be like, oh, you need to check out Echo, like they 100% deserve this. I don't really know, but they're the ones that I had on my mind with some of that. But yeah, that was quite interesting. Do you think it's a matter of time before? So obviously craft is something that's like being used by big beer when they buy a craft arm, or they try to brand things in a certain way, or whatever, to say, oh no, this is what you're expecting. Do you think there's a chance that they could say like that they could rip off like indie as a term? Do you see a world where that could be in the future, that they go, okay, craft's not the thing anymore, let's move to independent, and then, you know, purchase a smaller brewery, let them carry on doing their thing, quote unquote, and then be like, yeah, they're independent, we let them do their thing, it's independent?
I don't think that they could get away with saying independent. Could they riff on the word indie? 100%. I mean, how much commercial indie music is there? You know, like, indie used to be your proper garage bands and stuff like that, and then it all came commercialized. Like, that is a word that could definitely be bastardized and used any way, shape, or form that people would like. Independent is more difficult because there is a real connotation around that word.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think my brain's just gone instinctively like, I feel like there's a way for them to rip this off, but I think that there's got to be a smart way to go about it. Like, I think you're right, it'll be some way to rip off the term indie as opposed to
I don't. They
else.
Can't. They wouldn't.
They can't just go independently owned and operated.
Yeah, because they're not. Because we
independently.
All know they're not.
Do you reckon they could go independently operated?
I don't think they'd get away with it. But they could do something. They could do something with the word indie, I reckon.
Because it's that difficult thing, isn't it? If they're like, oh no, we let them make all the decisions of what they're going to brew and what they're going to do here, and they operate completely independently from us. We just let them crack on doing their thing. Like, is that some way that they can get around? Because they're like, we're not saying they're independently owned, just that they operate in an independent way.
Maybe. They'll find a way. One day they'll find a way. They like to co-op all of the words eventually.
It is interesting though. So I guess the other question that we sort of briefly touched upon is like, how do we get this into the hands of people that maybe need this type of guidance? Because as we said, I think we've just kind of agreed, correct me if I'm wrong, that we think the people that are going to see this and find the website and have the checker, they're all the people that probably already have a good steer on what is and isn't independent. What do we think that can be done to get this in the hands of the people that need it? What can consumers do to help, do you think?
I mean, we've got to put it in places where that person that's starting out finds it, right? So, I mean, obviously, we can put it up in our regular tap rooms and bars and bottle shops, etc. but then we risk it being a bit of an echo chamber. Like we were having a conversation before we started recording about when we go to, women's events and minority focused events, that there's always this risk that we're just talking in an echo chamber and everyone in that room is already on this same page. And so it's, yes, we're all getting great feedback because everyone here already believes that. It's getting it to the people that don't. So, if we only put it in places where there is already independent beer, then you're not going to move it along any. But not saying that they shouldn't, because obviously you are going to have new customers walking into the tap rooms, into the bottle shops, etc., and will find it. But it probably also needs to be in places where maybe they've only got one independent beer on. And then the people that are, they see the independent beer and maybe go for that over the neck oil or the Camden House. And then, is it on the beer mats so that when they're sitting down having their beer, oh, what's that? Let me have a look at that. It's on a poster,
That's what I was thinking, is like on a poster or like something that goes alongside. So like it's great to have that on the pump clip, but like to have something alongside that's like, what does this mean?
If you're not a beer nerd, how closely are you looking at some of those pump clips?
That's true. But I think having like some type of like signage or something that's by it, that's like, what does this mean?
Point of sale really signage, like where it's there so people see it and go, oh, what's that about?
I think there's also some things that we can do within our space. Obviously, like we're doing this episode, whether or not this gets into the hands of people that wouldn't normally know about this kind of thing, I don't know. I feel like there's people that have far more range of or far more
influence,
far more widespread contacts to be able to kind of spread out there for people that maybe aren't solely within the scene, that like get them talking about it, get that being written about. I'm wondering, and this might already be happening, but like, the leaflets that the actual like books that are in pubs, the printed pieces that are in pubs that are put out by camera, and I imagine it's in there, but I think it'd be really interesting to just regularly have that type of advertisement in it. So it's not just the launch of here is the launch of it, but like regular reoccurring in your face, maybe spotlight some of those breweries.
I mean, you would assume that because Camera are partnering with them, that it will
that they would do that.
Camera publications,
100%.
You would hope so.
Yeah, but I think I want to make sure though, like I would want it to just be more than just like the initial press release. Like I'd want it to be something that like we do, like we want to do with Brave Noise, bang on about it all the time to people, regularly repeat that. But maybe it's just like people educating their friends, and maybe locals that are owned by people that do have an interest in independent beer, maybe like putting on events that showcase this and showcase what independent beer is, and showcase breweries that have a tasting, have Meet the Brewers, like that kind of stuff, that talk about this. And maybe like if you're putting it on at your local and you're advertising it and you're not a place that is solely quote unquote craft beer, you have people that are not necessarily beer nerds coming in, at least they might see a poster for it even if they don't attend that event and go, oh yeah, that's interesting, what is that? And they might ask more questions about it.
Yeah, I would be interested to see if there's any events and stuff like maybe up on the lead up to BeerX, which is in March. If you've never heard of it, it is probably the main kind of craft beer conference in the UK for brewers and suppliers, and that happens in March. So I'd be interested to see if there's any kind of events on the lead up that pushes this.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see. But again, is that not in the lead up to BeerX? Is that not just marketing to the people that are aware of it?
Like but like because BeerX could then be a big launch for it, but that like around, because we're moving towards that big SIBA event, I feel like having things, because they've launched it now and then we've got a chunk of time before March. I'd like to see if there are events in venue, not just conferencey things, but in venues and showcasing independent breweries in certain areas, like something like that would be good, I think.
Yeah, out of sheer curiosity, from your perspective as somebody that sort of works in beer, does craft take on a different craft and independent? Like, so I know obviously the conversations around independent, but when we talk about the need for this arising from this idea of like, well, big beer has co-opted the term craft and it's getting harder to tell the difference. Does these labels mean something different to you as someone in the industry? Like, do you feel differently as a consumer about these labels as you do in terms of the importance of it within the industry?
It's a good question. I feel like as a a beer nerd consumer, I have made it my mission to make sure that I'm drinking independent beer, local beer, small batch artisanal beer, because I want to support those smaller businesses and those local businesses. As a supplier, it gets more difficult because obviously we can't limit ourselves to a certain niche part of the market. We can target niche parts of the market with different products, but there are some breweries that I know that we work with that I'm not necessarily happy about, but I can't do anything about that because companies got to sell product, companies got to make money. So
Yeah, and that's just being professional. So you're not going
yeah,
to love everyone that you've got to do business
no,
with, but you've got to do business with
but you
them.
still got to do it. I particularly work within the craft sector because that's like the area that what I do focuses on. So I see these people and I talk to these people and I hear about their issues and what's going on. And so I hear about these different things and what they think about them and whether they think they're good or not. Mixed feelings, I think, at the moment is what I could say. But
That's
yeah,
fair.
I have different perspectives as a drinker and as a beer professional. I have two very different perspectives of looking at things, and I hear and see different things depending on which hat I'm wearing at the time.
I think that's just cool. Like for me, though, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I feel like that's just being a professional. Like that's
Yeah.
being able to separate your
Well,
personal
thank you.
opinion from the business. So
Yeah.
you are nothing if but a professional. So there you go.
Thank you.
Do you think that corporate-owned breweries can be craft and spirit? Like, do you think that the only type of people that can carry that craft independent spirit, that creativity, that they have to be people branded independent? Or do you think that that's just because, like, for me, so for my experience in this is like, I personally think that independent for me means so much more than just the term craft. I think that big owned breweries can have a craft spirit, quote unquote, in their process. I don't think everybody does. But as we said at the start, I
Yeah.
think that they can have that spirit in mind. They can harness some of that creativity that we come to think of with craft, depending on who they are and what autonomy they're given from the parent company. When it
Yeah.
comes to the independent aspect of it, I like to know that the people I'm spending money with, it is going to them and their like I feel like I'm actually helping somebody
Yeah.
live out their dream.
Yeah.
Like more than anything else, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think my thoughts on it have definitely evolved over time. I think for me it comes down to what I don't like about big macro breweries is when they buy up all the little ones and change what they're doing.
You got the same recipes being pumped
You
out,
got the
but they're
same recipes
like,
being pumped out. Like they the quality that what you used to taste is not the same anymore because they've standardized it, or
yeah,
they start into that. We've got to make it palatable to the biggest number of people rather than it being the the nice thing that was made. The the niche thing that was made before. They've got to make it so that more people drink it, and that then it loses the spirit of it. Then I don't like that. I don't like it when they buy up breweries and close them down, or take buy the brand and get rid of that business that has then lost people's livelihoods, and area, it's then stopped areas from having business in it where they were before because they've closed down this section because they've moved it to their bigger plant, whatever. I don't like that. But then you can look at things like if you're new around here, listeners, you won't have known that Tori and I are big fans of Sam Adams. Like, there is some argument that they are now a massive brewery and they shouldn't be considered craft beer anymore.
Yeah, but they're not
corporate
owned.
Size, but they're not corporate owned. And I think they do, as you say, they're
still family owned.
They're still family owned. Yingling is still family owned.
They're still are like, those are all considered craft, though. They are still, in terms of the Brewers Association,
but there is there are
arguments,
but there are arguments where they're like, no, they shouldn't be anymore because they're too big, and their output is massive, and but they still have that. In my eyes, they are still craft. They've got that craft spirit. They're making interesting beer. I want breweries that are making interesting beer that I want to drink. I want to support local business. I want to support small makers who are really doing something interesting and doing something that they love.
I don't disagree with that.
How do you that's that criteria is maybe a bit more loosey-goosey than this stuff that SIBA and the Brewers Association have put out. But that's what my personal criteria is. This is what I'm going to buy. I want something that's interesting to drink. I want something that's flavourful and tasty. I want it to be from someone that has passion about it. And if possible, I try and support local and smaller breweries where I can, because they're the ones that really need it.
What's interesting is I've just Googled about the Sam Adams thing because I was like, oh, it's interesting because they keep getting referred to as being a craft brewery. Yeah. On lots of different websites, but on this website, which I haven't fact checked, so I feel like I'm gonna say this, but I haven't fact checked anything. So other than this website, I don't know anything about this website, but it does say Sam Adams is one of the nation's premier brewers of craft beers. Their annual production is over 6 million barrels. So
technically, they don't. Technically,
they're not, right? Yeah, as of 2022. But I'm not sure if that's factually correct or not, because I don't know the source of it. But interestingly, they wouldn't be.
And they've also bought Dogfish Head, they went in together. They also brew a bunch of different brands, so I don't know how much they fit into that criteria anymore. However, I still love them and they make delicious beer, so I'm gonna drink it.
But I think that captures that spirit aspect of it, or
exactly. That covers that craft spirit.
The Goose Island, I'm not averse to a Goose Island. I wouldn't take everything they have.
It's not like it used to be. When we used to be able to get the sour beers and stuff, that was from the barrel aging program. That was great. Nowadays, I think it's only if you saw it in a pub where there is more macro stuff, I'd probably go towards Goose Island than I would anything else.
But I'd even argue what 2 years ago, Guinness is always safe. 2 years ago,
but massive corporation from Diageo,
massive corporation.
We all have a Guinness. We're all like, yeah, we'll have a Guinness, but massive corporation, macro brewer.
But even with Goose Island, it was a year or two ago, and they put out that Tango beer, and that was all about trying to keep the sustainability, and I think that aspect, that is a big owned brewery, but they are still operate there's still that craft spirit in there that's we're thinking about sustainability, we're thinking about we're using this hop in a particular way that some places just don't.
And Bourbon County
care about
coveted beer.
I got two bottles because I had just happened to stumble upon them, and I was I'm not going to not buy it.
I tried Variant for the first time this year.
I've not tried any of that. I've not tried a Variant.
They had one out when I was in Yakima, and I was like, "Oh, I'll try a bit of that, please," because we don't get the Variants in the UK.
Yeah, no, I think that is all. It's all a lot to think about. It's all very, very interesting, and I feel like this is a topic that I would actually love to sit and talk to somebody from SIBA or Camera or wherever about it. I think it'd be interesting to understand a bit more about what they are doing with this campaign, how they are running this campaign to reach that audience that they're talking about and to fix that problem that they're saying they're talking about. Because I said, overall, my sentiment is I feel like it's a really positive thing. I don't think this is taking away from anything. again, I just question if that argument, if what they're saying they're fixing is actually what's being fixed here. The campaign aside, historically, or as this is so new, maybe you still do it. Like, as an individual, I thought this would just be interesting to ask. As an individual, how do you work out in your eyes when you decide if something is like independent craft, whatever you want to call it? Like, how do you work that out as an individual when you see something on the bar?
I mean, if it's somebody new to me, I mean, I'm terrible, and if it's something's new, I'm just going to try it.
I think it
That looks
depends.
interesting.
I would try it if it's new, but it depends. Like, if it's just a standard IPA or something like that, I might be like,
no,
meh.
probably wouldn't. Yeah.
I like IPAs, but if there's something else that's really interesting on, or something I've not heard of before,
I mean,
we've
said this before, right? We gravitate to whatever's interesting.
I gravitate to weird.
Gravitate to what's,
weird gravitates weird. I need something that's going to match my
interesting.
freak.
Yeah, and if failing that, Guinness.
I feel like I can't really top that. Yeah, I need a beer that's going to match my freak, but if not, Guinness. Yeah, it's
if I'm in like a random pub, like if I'm going into a tap room, then they better be like, that should be. I shouldn't have to worry, right? It should be local, independent, craft, whatever. And most of the places that I go to are that type of venue, so I don't have to think about it. If I'm just going into a random pub,
that's when they get you out. Those the random pubs where you're like, you've got to work out like what is actually independently owned.
That's when I'm more likely to go for a Guinness or a Blue Moon. And I'm fully aware that Blue Moon is not independent, but I will drink it.
Again, it's dependable. I feel like for me, there are things that I look for. I'm like, oh, what? And this sounds like so stupid, but I'm like, what is the artwork like? What is the name like? What is it? And like, I'll kind of start with those. I'll be like, those are all things that they're not a deciding factor in itself.
Have you got a local beer on? What's your local beer?
Yeah, I actually don't bother. I just Google. So I don't bother to ask because I know that sometimes people just don't know. Like when I'm in those types of places, it's it's 50-50 whether the person that you're asking is trained, knows about it. That I've been in places where somebody has said, oh, do you have anything local on? And they've been like, this. And it's like,
it's not.
It's just the closest that they had to something that they would be seeking. But like I use context clues where I'll be like, is there a flavour that I think is like is there a style / flavour that sounds like it's really interesting that might not be something that a bigger beer company might take a risk on brewing? Is there a name or a label that looks like it's eye-catching that maybe isn't something that's harder to go on? So like, again, I don't use any of these things in isolation, but ultimately if I think that something looks like there's a potential that it could be, I then just Google it, be like, I want to know about it.
I do tend to, if I'm in like a proper pub, I do tend to gravitate towards the handballs and see what's on those, because generally it will be something that you recognise, or if it's not, then it's probably local.
I think I'm just not. I think because cask isn't my first choice. You don't do
cask.
I don't not do it. It's just not my first choice. So like, unless there's something that's really interesting, like if there's something that's really interesting on, I'll take that over keg. But I prefer keg to cask. I'm a person that does prefer keg to cask. I've done side by sides. I just like the results of the keg better. But it depends, because I've had certain things that I've been like, actually, this is phenomenal on cask, but it's not what I gravitate towards. So I kind of tend to look at the keg list first and go, oh, actually, let me Google this. This sounds all right. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, like, I feel like that is probably the best way to find out who you're getting stuff from. Yeah. It's more just when you Google it and it's not quite as transparent, which I guess then if you're in the UK and it is a UK brewery, this is where the finder could be super useful. Except I think if you are looking for something that's not registered, like that's not going to be helpful to you. So
yeah. I think it's when you're in random venues, right, and you come across beer in those. Like I was at Ramsgate Music Hall the other week, Didn't expect to see anything particularly exciting, but they had Xylo on, who's a brewery from Margate, and I was like, I'll have some of that, thank you.
It's always a pleasant surprise when you recognise
Yes.
stuff. But yeah, I think that's kind of everything that I had done research on with this. Like I said, I would love to talk to somebody from SIBA about it, and I hope that what we said didn't come across harsh, because I don't mean it in a harsh way. I'm going in with a very, like, I'm trying to go and pick out these things that I think are the things that need to be talked about, because a lot of these articles will be like a lot of people that have this label signed off. They're fully on board with it, and they're like, yep, this is great, everything's great. But obviously who you're not hearing from are those people that are like Echo, they're not on there. Like, you're not hearing from those people. And that's why I'm trying to go in with like a little bit of like, I can see what they're trying to do, and I think it's really, really great what they're trying to do. But here are the things that I think could make it even better. But I say that as a person that's like, who am I? This is my unsolicited 2p. Who am I? That I don't even work in beer.
We are beer drinkers. We are beer drinkers, and we are highlighting the barriers that there might be. And if you don't highlight things like that, then improvements can't be made.
Yeah. And again, I don't want it to sound like we're being too harsh, but these are things that I think need to be considered. So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so that was just, we didn't want to get too in the weeds of it. We just wanted to kind of highlight it at a high level, but we'll post all the links to the articles and the website and the Brewers Association guide, so you can check that out as well. I'm just going to say as well, when I went on to get to fact check some of the stuff on the Brewers Association, I didn't realise, because what I've learned is I don't quite go on some of these websites enough where they have like all the news articles and stuff. So like, I get the emails from like the Guild of Beer Writers, and when I open up that, I'm like, oh, that's some really, really cool articles I want to check out. And then I'll get, as I've said before on episodes, my phone will recommend me stuff that's like beer related to check out. I'm like, that's cool. It's normally like Vine Pair articles and all these other really, really great articles. But I never stop and go, I'm going to go check out what's new on the Brewers Association website.
Yeah.
But there's some really cool articles on there today. Like the Japanese Beer Award finalists were announced, and I was like, I want to know more about that. I opened up about 3 or 4 articles, and I was like, I want to know more about that. I'll come back to that later. And I saved it, all because I went on just to find the guidelines of what defined a craft brewer.
My top tip for that is, if they've got a newsletter, sign up for the newsletter, and then you get them. Like, I've signed up to Hop Culture's one.
Yeah, Hop Culture's another one.
Hop Culture, Vine Pair, I have come through, and then I'll look at them when I get a chance and see what interesting things they bring up.
I got too many emails.
Keep yourself abreast of the industry.
All right, that sounded very, very fancy. Keep yourself abreast. I feel like you put your fancy
I did, that
voice
was my
on.
work voice.
It's the thing. I get too many emails.
Yeah, but I also have Hop newsletters come through at work as well.
You have to keep yourself abreast of the industry.
I do. And I have marketing ones come through. Like, I have like marketing industry ones come through as well.
Well, I've got all like I sign up for all like the brewery newsletters and stuff, and I feel like that alone there's so many that come out, and not in a bad way. It's really great, but I'm like, there is so many that come out, and then it's like I get the Guild newsletters which come out like really frequently, and I'm like, that's really good because there's even more. I just never make the time to sit down and read some of it, and it's like this campaign is only because I've seen so many people post about it. I was like, okay, let me go and check this out and read this and everything. I'm even going on, I guess, the SIBA website. I was like, oh, there's more stuff I should read here. And I'm like, oh, I don't have enough time. I need to make like a Sunday afternoon ritual of like, have my iced coffee in the morning and keep myself abreast of what's going on in the industry.
And don't let us encourage you to just fill your inboxes up with rubbish either.
Put in rules. Like, I suggest put in rules. I suggest sign up to all of them, but put in mailbox rules so it filters to the correct place.
There you go.
But definitely keep yourself abreast of the industry.
Tori, if people want to ask you more of your top tips about how to sort out their emails, how can they get hold of you?
I wouldn't ask me about that because I'm rubbish at it. I left it too late, and now it's too late. It's, you know, when you're like, oh, I feel like it's too late to ask. I feel like it's too late to do anything. Rick is always having a go at me when he walks in and my inbox is open because he's like, your mailbox is a mess. Like, how do you do anything? And I'm like, ADHD is how I do all my things. But yeah, if you want to come talk to me about some of this, if you want to come and have like a conversation about some of this, I'm super, super into having this conversation. Like, people from SIBA will go and have that conversation. If you're a brewery, what I really want to hear from is like, if you're a brewery that doesn't qualify for the outlines that are there, like I would be really, really interested in talking to you about your thoughts on this, and how this impacts you, and like what can be done to make sure you're covered by some of this. Like, that would be super interesting to me. So if you want to come talk to me, you can come talk to me on Instagram at adventures_in_hoptimism, or you can email me at adventuresinhoptimism@gmail.com. If you want to talk to both of us, maybe you're a brewery that wants to be interviewed and you want to talk about how maybe you're somebody that is part of this initiative and you're like, oh, I want to tell you about how it's impacted me really, really positively. Like, that's equally an awesome conversation. Come find us at A Woman's Brew on Instagram, or A Woman's Brew podcast at gmail.com. Joe, if people want to talk to you about what emails they should be subscribing to keep themselves in, what can they talk to you about?
I can give you some top tips. You can come find me on Instagram. I'm Love Beer Learning. You can come to my website, which is lovebeerlearning.co.uk, or you can email me. Come and join in my inbox, lovebeerlearning@gmail.com. Right, well, we're going to go drink some independent beer, right?
Yeah. That note. Cheers.